Well, kia ora whānau, and welcome to this little conversation that I'm going to be leading you on. It's going to talk about three things that are built into our learning environment here at Otago Polytechnic. So when we're thinking about our bicultural community and how we engage in concepts of biculturalism within our built environment, but also in what we teach, we try to embed a lot of that narrative into artefacts within our learning environment. And this here is one of them. This here is what we call our Mauri kohatsu. And that concept Mauri, from our Indigenous people's perspective, is the concept of a life force. It's all of the goodness and the lessons and the badness sometimes, but all of the life that goes into making an element what it is. Now, all things and all people have Mauri because they all come from somewhere, they all come from a creator, they all come from a creation story, from a meta-narrative. Within this here, the Mauri, the story, the life force, the energy that sits within these three stones is starting from the bottom here. You'll see this white stone is what we call Oamaru stone. So it's a sandstone that's taken from our northern boundary of where we are within our particular area. And this stone here, the sandstone, is very important to us because we often talk about the sandstone rubbing other stones. So even though it's a particularly soft stone, it has the ability to wear other things down. In the middle here, we have the black rock from the quarries out in the harbour. So with this we talk about where our northern boundary is, but also that connection that we have to the sea. So this rock here connects us to those waters and to those people that come from other places. And on the top here is a rock that we call pounamu. And it's a green stone, it's a jade. So for those of you from Turtle Island, from Canada, you know all about jade, but this one here exists only in specific mountains and rivers here in the South Island of New Zealand. And it's a very important stone for us, it's a very important rock for us because it contains the whakapapa, the layering of time for many, many generations and the Mauri of things that have happened in the past. With this combination of stones as they are, we talk about who we are within this place, our geographic boundaries, from the north into the rivers, into the waterways, and up into the mountains, ki uta ki tai. It reminds us of where we're located, but it's also a nice little place for us to stop. I always come in the morning when I come past and just rub the stone, the Mauri stone, so our Mauri, the energy that I have and the energy of the stone come together. Stop and think about what I'll be doing during the day. So while this stone, or this collection of stones here at once, talks about place, it gives basis for our identity of who we are within these buildings, within the pathways that we walk together, but it also talks about that whole idea of practice of what we do, to stop, to think, remember who we are within place and what we're going to be doing. And there are quite a few small, well, and sometimes not so small artefacts within our learning environment. And if you come with me, I'll show you another couple, So up here, just above my head, you might be able to see what we call the wings of the toroa, of the albatross. Now for us, the albatross is a very significant bird for us within this area, within this place. Because the albatross, what he does is flies around the Pacific Rim. So he nests out on the peninsula, and non-gender specific he. The albatross, they nest out on the peninsula and rear their chicks there, and when it's time to go, they fly off around the whole Pacific Rim, around up where you guys are, and only make landfall once again on our peninsula. So when we're thinking about ourselves within the place, within the identity of our people here, we think about the toroa, and when he goes out, when they go out into the world, when they investigate what's going on, but knowing that always they have a nest here within our place, within our home. If we look down on the carpet squares down here, and they might be a wee bit hard to see with the light, but you'll see with the carpet squares there's a mixture of grey, of dark, and of the white colours as well. Now the white colours reflect the clouds that are in the sky, and the darker colours are the reflection or the shadows on the earth. So when we look at this, we think about, well, the narrative that goes with this is te roimata o te toroa, so the tears of the albatross. Now, they're not tears out of happiness or sadness. The tears that the albatross cries are tears that are used to keep the vision clear. Of course, being seabirds, they get a lot of salination, a lot of salt in their eyes. So the tears keep the vision clear. And when your vision's clear and you fly above the clouds, you can see the clouds themselves. So you have a macro view of everything that happens within your place, but also the ongoing effects of the shadows on the ground. So everything that we can see has a reciprocal, sometimes intended, sometimes unintended impact. So the wings of the toroa, reminding all of us here that when we're in this place, we can fly out into the world, but we come back to nest here, and the carpet on the ground to remind us that actually when we are flying, have a view of the macro, understand where everything lies, but of the consequences of your actions, etc. Well, have we wandered down here, and I'll tell you another story, eh? So generally speaking, when we're looking at these stories, we use a philosophy that we call te arahonohono. Te arahonohono. And te arahonohono talks about the pathways that connect people and connect things. Within this larger narrative, from that iwi Māori perspective of te arahonohono, we talk about the pathways in the landscape that are formed both by naturally occurring phenomena, so those pathways that were here before we got here, the rivers, the mountain passes, the sea pathways, those pathways that go out into the Pacific and beyond. We also talk about the pathways of our people, the people of the Waitaha, the Hawea, the Mamoi, the Tahu, those people that arrived here from those great migrations of waka, the indigenous people of this place. But we also remember that within that narrative, other people are always arriving in this place. So up in the harbour down here where the black stone comes from, up in that harbour up here, sailing ships arrived, and whaling people and sealing people arrived and joined with our people in this place and built relationships and lived together. We had people from the gold fields, the gold rushes arriving, and they went up into the inland. They followed the rivers that our old people took them on, those pathways. Those pathways, those walking paths that we've travelled for many generations turned into bullock tracks. And in the gold rush days, everyone followed those pathways into the inland. Then came the farmers, etc. So agriculture arrived in this place in a big way. And now we've got a lot of other economic activity such as wine growing, a lot of dairy, which I'm not too sure about, but it's there anyway. It's part of that pathway story. And now we've got an industry that is looking at the catchment and ownership of water, which is going to be the next big thing that we as Indigenous people who have that connection to those naturally occurring phenomena and to those pathways have to consider in our larger discourse that we have within New Zealand. So those pathways that connect, those pathways that have connected our people to this place, those pathways that connect those early settlers, those whalers and sealers and gold miners to this place, and the pathways that still bring people here through the airport. Not many people arrive up at the harbour anymore, but the people that arrive in this place and how we understand our narrative altogether. A narrative that looks at place, where we are, that looks at identity, who we are together collectively, who we are individually, how we join our discourses together, how we understand each other, and therefore how we practice what we actually do. Place, identity, practice. I've got another couple of things I want to show you as well. We'll wander over there. what I want to talk about in this part of our narrative when we're looking at who we are as Otago Polytechnic from a cultural perspective and how we sit within a landscape within this place, it's always important for us to remember that we are actually sitting in landscape. The buildings, the built environment sits on and within a very special place, and a part of that narrative is told once again through these carpet squares. And if we look down here, we can see these green carpet squares here, they tell the story of our forested areas, of the trees that used to be in here, of the forests that we used to interact with. And those forests, of course, holding the forest birds and plenty of food. It talks about our interaction with that place and how we live in and with that place. And as we walk down here, we can see the grey of this area here, which talks about the wetlands. So from the forest into the wetlands and through the, and if you follow me, see if you can keep up, through the wetlands and into those places that are important for things like the wetland creatures, for the wetland birds that live within the space as well. Remembering that it's not just the nice forests or the rivers, but the wetlands is part of the ecology that's very important when we look at it as a whole. And down in here, you'll see this beautiful blue, which represents the rivers, the waterways. And in our first conversation, we talked a little bit about those waterways and how we use them as pathways to follow. But this piece of water here is significant because under here was a river that used to flow. They got dammed up and diverted. But we remember the Maori, if you remember that story before, that life force of that river that was here. And even though it's not here now and we can't see it, that life force still runs through the earth. So we remember that river and the people that used to sit beside it in the wetlands and in the forests and the activities that we're involved in. Now this river here, it was a very significant river for our people in this area. It was a place where we'd go to perform a lot of ceremonial rites, but also a place that fed into a waterfall that just went off the side here, and you may or may not be able to see that, and out into the larger bay. But you'll see up here, and I'll go this way, there are some other smaller parts of our narrative that people sometimes can't read through the, through the lens that they bring. And part of that is these rounded seats here. Back in the day, our people, particularly in this area, we'd sit and our housing was round houses, what we call wharero. So we try to arrange this seating with that feeling of the round wharero, the round houses, so that when our students, when our learners come and sit, they sit in a circle, in a learning circle, in a teaching circle, in a talking circle together. And I had a wonderful experience, and I shouldn't be telling too many stories now, but a great experience in Medicine Hat, in a teepee circle up there, talking to the people of that place, and where people were designated to sit within that teepee circle, and how important it was that that circular voice was used, that everyone had a say, that all those voices were heard. So these circular formations replicate our old style of architecture and also our old style of learning and teaching. Up on the side here is what we call a moki from our language, which was an inland freshwater transportation boat, waka, a canoe. And these were made out of elements that were in the landscape, so they responded to the landscape, and we'd use these to float things like pounamu, forest birds, etc., down the rivers back into the shore where we were living. So they're really, really important part of our economic past, of our economic story, but that cultural economic story. So by bringing this in here, we're not just saying that the economies that arrived with the sailors and the whalers and the sealers was important, but actually we had our own economic base that formed the basis of those gold rushes following up and down the rivers, etc. So when we talk about that concept of arohonohono, of joining together, of the pathways that connect, we talk about, once again, those naturally occurring pathways that sit in the environment, that hold the birds, that hold the fish, that hold the mauri of this place as it is. We talk about the pathways where people sit and learn and talk and discuss, from the way our old people used to do it into the way things are done now, and joining those things together. We talk about the pathways of the economies, of the practice of what we do and how we've always done things, and how these two things can sit and inform each other. In our last kōrero, our last little speech and or conversation, as it is, in this part we'll be heading outside. So you just hold tight, I'll see you soon. So on here you can see our mokihi and how they were built, how they were constructed, with a timber frame on the inside, lashed together, and I suppose reeds on the outside. A flat platform on top for sitting on and for storing things, and of course built to go on a river with a bow and a stern. Very simplistic, be left beside the rivers for our people when they came season after season. Repairs were easy to make, and if you needed to start again, it was only a day or two to get them done. Well, here we are outside. It's a beautiful day, the sun's shining on my face, and we're standing beside this wonderful sculpture, which will be the last thing that I want to introduce to you when I'm talking about the cultural narrative of what we build into here at within our learning environment at Otago Polytechnic. Now within this here, this wonderful bronze sculpture is based on the concept of kete, of knowledge baskets. And one of our creation stories talks about how people attained knowledge that pertains to this earth by ascending through the levels of knowledge that was held up and beyond. I won't go too far into it. But through attaining that knowledge and the different knowledges that impact upon people, all of that knowledge was collected in kete, in baskets. Now, this here also talks about the wonderful cultural and bicultural nature of our learning environment and of who we are as people. And if you have a good close look at this here, you come up and have a look, you'll see that the brass weaving as it is, there is the wonderful rope pattern on here. Now, the imprint from this rope pattern was taken from steel ropes that were found out on the peninsula, out where the toroa, out where the albatross are. And with that, replicating that idea of our narrative, the narrative of our maritime history, of those whalers and sealers that came. So although we couldn't use the wire rope itself, it is a taonga that sits and tells a story about our place. That imprint comes directly from those ropes. Up in here you'll see this lovely green pattern here, and this represents the stained glass windows that sit in one of our local marae, one of our local meeting houses, the place where our people meet and talk. And once again it makes the connection to, well, first of all, the window that we look in and we look out of. It makes the connection to our place, to our whare, to the place where our people have lived and talked and learned for such a long time. But it also reflects that colour of the pounamu. And if you remember back in one of our first conversations, we talked about that idea of the pounamu as a mauri stone that holds the essence, the life force of the people of the place itself. So within this here, what we're saying within our learning environment is we combine both cultural aspects of the people that arrived in the ships and the boats with the wire rope, of the people that have sat here looking out and looking inwards for many, many generations, the indigenous people. Within this, we talk about how both of those cultures come together within this place here. And we talk about the sharing of knowledge, bringing what we both have, bringing what we all have into one place at one time, and sharing and holding that knowledge together. And this all sits within this grander narrative of te arohonohono, the pathways that we walk on, those pathways that our people have walked for many generations, the pathways that the people from the boats from those sailing ships, when they come up, the gold miners, the farmers, etc., etc., those people that are still arriving today. It also talks about the pathways of the people that are still to come. Now, theoretically, you guys are here with us, so you're included in that narrative. Even though you haven't made landfall here, our pathways are crossing. So this here, the representation of this sculpture, of this kete, of us bringing our knowledge together is very, very important. It talks about place, it talks about identity, it talks about practice. Within this kete we'll hold stories about our place, about our individual identity, our collective identity, and we'll share stories about our practice. So great for you to be here on this little journey with us, or this tour around our place. Yeah, looking forward to hearing back from you, hearing more from you soon. So, ka kite anō, I'll see you soon. Mā te wā. Until that time.